Richard, what's going on, man? Welcome back.
Hey, Larry, how you doing today? I'm doing good, and really appreciate you inviting me back to talk about another topic.
Well, this one's big.
This
We
one is
need
big.
we
This
need to
one's
talk
big.
about this one.
So this one's a big one.
The last time you came on the podcast, you gave like a teaser at the end. I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but it was along the lines of like, "Hey, we didn't tackle this particular topic, but if you have me back on, we should." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, well, yeah, we have to talk about social media."
Yeah,
And
we spent quite a bit of time talking about alcohol and drugs, which is another very important topic for parents. But next on the list is of importance is this whole social media thing that's going on with teenagers.
yeah, so let's talk about it. What are the most, I guess, popular apps? And what do we know specifically about these apps individually?
Well, the most popular ones seem to be Instagram, which is used by about 22 million teenagers. Facebook, not so much. Facebook seems to be more popular among adults than adolescents. TikTok is a very popular one. It's probably one of the most popular, if not the most popular, with about 60 some percent of teenagers signing into and using TikTok on a weekly basis. There's probably well over 100 million users of TikTok. And then there's Snapchat, which is becoming again very popular with teens. About 40 some percent of teenagers will use Snapchat. It's a little bit different than the other applications, and it's called Snapchat because you take a brief snap, so to speak. You send it out and it automatically evaporates after a certain period of time. So teenagers can be assured that whatever they're sending out there gets eliminated almost routinely. So there's a number of applications out there that parents need to be aware of, and just be mindful of the fact that there are these different applications on there. Their teenager may be on more than one of these applications.
And can you briefly talk about, I mean, obviously I'm on Facebook. Obviously that might not be the most dangerous one for kids, but Instagram, um, what is what's the compulsion with Instagram? Why do so many teenagers want to be on Instagram?
Well, it's Instagram, and I would say TikTok is probably more popular among teenagers. These applications allow them to reach out into the world, so to speak, and basically have conversations or share information or post pictures, and see information out there that they might not otherwise have the ability to get to. Now, not all of these applications are bad. Not everything on an application is bad. I have Facebook, for example. I have a TikTok because I have a granddaughter that uses TikTok. So I get on TikTok. Quite honestly, there's some pretty humorous and good information on TikTok. You can learn some things. You can laugh. You can have a good time. But with anything else, there's always the potential of a downside, of a dark side. There are people that are on these applications that probably shouldn't be, and they're out there roaming around. There's information out there that probably shouldn't be out there. And that just means that there's a risk associated with these applications, that a teenager may come up with against somebody, or may meet somebody or see something that they probably shouldn't be seeing and probably shouldn't be talking to.
And what is the deal with TikTok? Like when I first heard TikTok come out, like I was just like, God, what is this now? Like I just was annoyed, like right off the bat. Well, now we're really tight in our family when it comes to how much phone time our kids get. And that my
Yeah.
two younger ones, 8 and 6, they obviously do not have a phone. But my 14-year-old and 16-year-old have a phone. They got their phones when they turned 13.
Yeah.
And my wife and I have applications put on those phones to make sure that they're safe. Like
Yeah.
we use Bark. Bark is a big partner, obviously, with our with podcasts, and I love that company. But what we do is the kids only get 1 hour a day of those types of applications, and they're not on social. They do TikTok, but not the other ones. And whenever their TikTok time is done, it just shuts down and they can't access it until the next day. But the things that, like, I was on a trip with my 14-year-old last week, and I was overhearing TikTok, and I was annoyed out of my mind. I was like, this doesn't even sound like it was driving me absolutely crazy. Like the songs and the skits. And to be honest, I'm like, is the generation after us just completely dumb? Or I was actually, my blood started to boil. I don't understand TikTok really. I have a TikTok account just because like we put out our good content on that, like our short clips of, for skills that are going to help men with their marriages and kids and all that good stuff. But for a teenager, I don't get it.
I think you just gave a good example of how TikTok can be used appropriately to put out educational material out there, to put out information that can actually be helpful to parents. But there's a lot of TikTok that quite honestly centers around goofiness. It's people doing stupid things they think are funny. There are some instructional aspects to TikTok. You can learn, you can learn how to cook. You can learn how to bake. There's recipes that people show you how to cook. So like anything else, there's a good side to it where people can take advantage of some educational material. And there's some just plain ass crazy stuff that's out there that people think are funny that's not really funny. And so you just have to be careful. You have to monitor them. I think it's one of the recommendations I have for parents is exactly what you're doing. If your teenager is on an application, download that application. Get on that application and look at it. See what's going on. Make sure you have access to your child's account. And just become familiar, more informed about what the application is that your teenager is using and stay on top of it. And then the other thing is like what you're doing, limit their time, because time gets away from all of us, even adults on Facebook, that pretty soon they're spending crazy ass time, on Facebook. It gets away from them. Well, the same thing can happen to teenagers too. So if you don't put a constraint, if you don't put a limitation, you're going to find your teenager on things like TikTok or some of these other applications for hours and hours and hours. They spend an awful lot of time on this. On Snapchat, 41% of teens use Snapchat. They're on it at least 50 minutes a day. And they check into it multiple times a day. So you do have to put some constraints on how often they can be on these social apps, no matter which one they're using.
And what I've noticed with teenagers is Snapchat is the way that they actually communicate for just regular communication. Like a lot of these teenagers don't even really text that much anymore. They use Snapchat to use their communication. Correct?
Some of them do use Snapchat as a primary vehicle to communicate with their friends. Some of them will create private rooms, and parents need to be aware of that. They'll have a private room, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. If they have a group of close friends that they want to put into a private room, so it's just them and their friends talking and doing what they're doing, that's okay. But if you allow your child to have a private room, you have to insist that you have access to that private room. It's not private for you. You can get into that private room anytime you want. But you're right. A lot of the social media things like Snapchat, for example, are a way in which teenagers are reaching out to people, reaching out to their friends, reaching out to the community, and interacting with it. It's become almost a primary way of interacting and communicating outside of school, in the neighborhood from people everywhere.
That's I did not know about the private room. My kids don't have Snapchat though. They keep asking me for it and I keep just telling them no. What are some dangers you've seen with Snapchat that parents just don't see?
Well, I think the biggest feature to Snapchat and why a lot of people are attracted to it, it's called Snapchat because you take a snap of something, a picture, whatever you're putting out there. And after a very short period of time, it evaporates. It just goes away. It disappears. So yeah, you could have a teenager that puts something out there, and after 3 or 4 minutes, it's gone. It just evaporates. You'll never see it. And I think that that's not the primary reason why they use Snapchat, but it is a feature of Snapchat that parents need to be aware of. There are some privacy settings that can be implemented, but I think Snapchat, because of this vanishing type of feature where it just goes away, I think poses a different level of risk.
And I mean, when we say it goes away, does it really go away? I mean, where does it go?
I'm not sure it actually really goes away, but it's much more difficult to find.
Got it.
I don't think anything actually ever goes away anymore.
Right. Because that was like the big thing, I think, when Snapchat first came out, like years ago. Like you could send a photo to somebody and it goes away after they view it. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I have an account, but I only have I never use it to like snap anything. But I use the account because like if me and the kids are like waiting to get our haircuts or something like that, we'll use those funny filters.
Yeah.
Take pictures and videos like with our face and stuff like that. And it's entertaining, but I don't use it for anything else beyond that. Okay. So that sounds dangerous.
It's risky.
Yeah. Do you have any statistics on, online predators and activity through Snapchat trying to get to like underage girls or anything like that?
I haven't seen any recent statistics on that, but you raise a very good point. That is a vulnerability that can be very scary for parents. And just another reason why parents need to keep on top of these apps. They need to be involved with it. They need to know what their kids are doing, and they need to set limitations on how often they can be on these applications. Like anything else, there's always a risk. There's always a danger that when you're out there in the internet world, that your child could come into contact with people that, quite honestly, they should not be interacting with. And they don't know anything about these people. They may come across as a teenager, but they're not a teenager.
Right. You always see, I think it was Chris Hansen with MSNBC. He was To Catch a Predator. He had that show back in the day. That show used to make me so irate and angry. I don't have daughters, but like just seeing these scumbags like trying to hook up with these underage girls, like, I mean, oh my God, it just would make my blood.
I watched that show too, and it was just disgusting.
Yeah.
The good thing is they got caught.
Oh, they did. Yeah. And they're going to prison for a long time.
Yes.
They have many boyfriends in prison. You mentioned before we got started today that Facebook actually did a study. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Facebook did an internal study on how applications were affecting teenagers, and eventually the study did become known in public. One of the interesting things that came out of the study was that teenagers know that these applications are addictive, compulsive. They know that. And they also admit that they have a desire to spend less time on those applications. But then they also say that they just don't have enough self-control to change their scrolling behavior. So that's almost like a classic definition of addiction, the inability to control a behavior in spite of negative consequences. But I thought one of the interesting findings was these teenagers themselves saying, look, I know I spend too much time on here, but I just can't control it. I just don't have enough self-control to back away from it. Another interesting finding was that 60% of girls and 40% of boys experience some type of negative social comparison. In other words, they're comparing themselves with other images and other people that they see on Facebook, and they're walking away having a negative feeling about themselves. 37% of girls said that they feel pressured to look perfect in their posts. They feel perfect. They feel like they have to look perfect when they put a post out there of themselves or a picture of themselves. A third of the girls, 33% of the girls, say that the content that they see makes them feel worse about themselves, actually makes them feel worse about themselves. Again, comparing themselves to these images that are often made up, fake, and then they compare themselves to them. And girls are very vulnerable to self-image. So when they see these things, they oftentimes walk away feeling negatively about themselves. 50% of users report feeling unattractive and said that the feeling came from Instagram. And about 14% of boys said that Instagram makes them feel worse about themselves. So for teenagers who are already struggling with some type of mental health issue, social media may actually make their feelings worse. So parents just need to be aware that, particularly for girls, sometimes the social media can really tear down their self-esteem, and they walk away feeling bad about themselves because they don't always understand that these images that they're seeing of other girls, for example, are not necessarily made up, but made up to look extremely attractive, far more than what they really are. And girls compare themselves to that.
I mean, that all makes total sense. And, it's this vicious cycle, this vicious loop of like, I can't stop scrolling. And when I do that, I don't feel good about myself, but yet I just can't stop scrolling.
Yeah.
The thing that worries me the most, Richard, is parents and even my own kids. Sometimes I sit there, the story I tell myself when I see my kids, even for an hour on TikTok, is I'm like, what is this doing to their brain? Like, is this, do I keep them from this? And then I start to think, well, I don't know if I keep it from them because then they might want it more. Maybe it's best if they have a boundary.
Yeah.
But I guess I don't necessarily understand. I guess that from a psychology standpoint, the only thing that I can possibly think of is it's kind of like Netflix. You binge watch, these 7 shows, and because you just can't help it, you're like, oh my gosh, that just left such a hook at the end of this one episode. I have to watch the next one. And then you're like, oh my gosh, we've been sitting here for 7 hours watching this Netflix series.
Yeah.
TikTok, I think is very similar, but the videos are 10 seconds and you almost just can't help yourself. Oh, it's just 10. The next one's just 10 seconds. So I'll just scroll the next one. Oh, the next one's just, oh, this one looks interesting. I'll just spend one more and then one more and then one. And then you're in like this flow state and one more just never happens. You just keep going. And the final thing that I wanted to ask you about this is about TikTok is I've heard that scrolling, watching video after video of TikTok and the impact on the brain and how it's mentally exhausting. Like kids actually feel mentally and physically tired after scrolling through TikTok, and which probably impacts their productivity. Do we have any research or data on that?
I haven't seen any, but it makes sense, that if a child is spending ridiculous amounts of time scrolling through TikTok, that it's going to have some type of an effect on them. There has been some studies done about how, these applications sort of affect the brain in a way. And because when a child, for example, a teenager gets a text message, what happens in their brain? Well, it sort of lights up. They get excited. They have a positive response to that. Or they get a text message or a phone call or whatever it is, or they hear that little signal, that little beep on their phone, actually sort of increases that little rise of dopamine, that pleasure chemical, and they get a rush, so to speak, out of that. So I'm not sure that we understand everything that's going on with the brain, with all of these applications and how they affect them. But they do seem to have some effect that we may not completely understand.
Interesting. Sorry if I got distracted there for a second, but the two teenage girls just walked into my house that I have no clue who they are, but obviously my teenage sons know who they are, and they're like looking in my office like, I didn't know what was going on. What's up, guys? Now I got all kinds of teenagers in my office. So that's summertime for you, my friend.
Yes, it is.
All right. So you know what? I mean, so what's a parent to do, Richard? What are we supposed to, we know the impact that scrolling through social media is probably having a negative impact on our kids, self-image.
Yeah.
the way they maybe perceive the world. Maybe they feel like they're not good enough. We don't necessarily want to take those social media platforms away from them, but I gotta be really honest and upfront with you. I I really, and this maybe sounds like a crotchety, like 80-year-old man saying this, but like I worry about what's gonna happen to the brains of our kids if they do this too much. Like, I mean, Richard, luckily our kids don't get a whole lot of screen time, but it's because we put some tight ropes around it. But dude, I see this, and those of you guys watching us on YouTube, I don't see a teenager not doing this. We went to a concert last night, and the person who is directing us to go park somewhere was literally doing this. I pulled up to them. They were sitting there with one of the lighted things, supposed to be telling me where to go and supposed to take my money. And she was just like doing this. And I'm
Yep.
like, is she even know I'm here? Like, I was right there in front of her. And then she's like, oh, hey, she's like, okay, $10. Okay, go over there. Another thing that happened, I was in my gym and I wanted to buy a pre-workout drink. I went up to the desk and I went to pay for it. And this girl behind the desk is like doing this.
Yeah.
And she has her phone in her hand. Those guys watching us on YouTube, she goes, and they look up my account with my phone number. She's like, what's your phone number? I told her, she's like, what? I'm sorry, what are the last four digits? And she was doing this. I was like, I told her. And then she's like, 68. I was like, no, 60. And she's like, looking at her phone, and she goes, your name's not coming up. I was like, what's the number? She read it back to me. It was wrong. And I looked at, and I just sort of did one of these. I just sort of was like, I just sort of like cocked my head and I just stared at her. Basically, it took everything I had to say, if you put the phone down and focus on what I'm telling you, you'd get it right. But I didn't do that. I just looked at it. She got the message though. She put her phone down and she got it. But I was just like, come on, like, let's be human beings here and interact without this phone. So,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
That's a great example of how these applications become compulsive, almost addictive, and people, even at work, cannot tear themselves away from it. It's almost like, if I'm not checking it ever so often, I'm gonna miss out on this big event that's going to be there. It gets to the extreme, and parents need to be very aware of how compulsive these applications can be. They need to set limits.
I agree. All right. Well, I know we're going to talk about the Mayo Clinic has some recommendations around this. I want to ask you though about the conversation that we have with our kids around this, because most parents, quite frankly, the phones are a great babysitter, right? It's like, well, and not that the intent for parents is to not interact with their kids, but at the same time, like parents are like, hey, this is like, when I know my kids, our little kids get 1 hour of Amazon tablet time where they can play educational games, and my older ones get 1 hour of phone time where they can dive into something like TikTok if they want to. I will say this, when all of them are on that, it's almost like, oh my gosh, I have a window of time where I can get a lot of things done, or I have, or I can go do this thing really quickly. And I know that they're good, not leave the house, but like, I know I can go catch up on my podcast. My wife is probably like, I can go do the dishes real quick, or I can do this, do that. And it's like this kind of like it occupies them really well. So some of us parents are like, oh, it's kind of a cool thing because it allows me to get some things done. But also I don't want my kids on it that much. And this is where I want the advice. I'm totally dreading the conversation because I don't want to fight with them. And I don't even know what to say to them, to be honest, to where the conversation could be somewhat positive. So how do we have that conversation?
Well, I think that gets into some of the recommendations from Mayo Clinic. One of the recommendations was to set reasonable limits. Talk to your child about how to avoid social media interfering with their activities, like their sleep time, like family meal time, like doing homework. Encourage your child to have a regular bedtime and sleep routine, and keep cell phones and tablets and electronic devices out of their bedrooms. out of their bedrooms. So when you're having this conversation, you want to talk about have discussion with your child about, reasonable limitations and what can we talk about here that's a reasonable limitation? What do we not want these social applications to interfere with? The second recommendation was to monitor your teen's accounts. Let your teen know that you're going to regularly check on their accounts and then make sure that you follow through. And I would add to that, download the app on your phone, spend some time becoming familiar with whatever application you allow your child to be on. And then I think in a conversation with your child, you should emphasize what's not okay. Okay. Discourage gossiping, discourage spreading rumors, discourage any type of bullying or damaging someone's reputation. Talk about what's appropriate and what's safe on social media. Set those boundaries in place and have a discussion with your child. Encourage face-to-face contact with their friends. Don't let all of their time interacting with their friends be social media. Encourage them to have face-to-face contact with their friends. Put the phones down and have a conversation with your friend. Have activities with your friend. And then talk about social media itself. Talk about the habits. Ask how your teenager, even before they get an application, ask your teenager, how are you going to use this social media app? How does it make you feel? And remind them that social media applications are often full of unrealistic images. What do they plan on posting? What do they think they're going to be posting? What do they want to use this application for? So at the very beginning, have these conversations with your child before they ever get into using these apps. And I use conversation because that's literally what I mean. Have an open conversation, get input from your kids. And then I would say also, once your child is on social media, check in with them from time to time to see how things are going. What have you seen on social apps that's been interesting? Has there been anything that you thought was inappropriate? Has there been anything that's bothered you? What have you seen on social app? Can you share with me some of what you've been seeing and some of what you've been learning? Sort of you've got that dialogue going on with your child so that you're participating in learning what they're seeing on there. And then finally, I would say as a parent, learn about the parental controls that you have available. If you don't know what those are, check with your internet providers, check with your cell phone provider, find out what applications you can use to set limitations on your phone. I know my wife, for example, when we have our grandkids here, we have the ability to shut off access to the internet at a specific time. So she may shut it off at 10 or 11 or 12 o'clock at night, whatever appropriate. Whatever social media or whatever parental applications that are available to you as a parent, you should check those out, download them on your phone if you need it, and use them so that you have control over the times, the days, the frequency that your child is on these social apps. You have that type of parental control.
I think a lot of parents view this as why I don't have control or I don't want to fight that fight. And I would encourage you to fight that fight. That's a fight and a conversation worth having. And it's for the safety of your kids. Like, listen, as long as my boys have had their phone, like the deal for phone use in this house for you, because it's kind of like driving. And this is the way we've explained to our kids, driving is not a right, it's a privilege. And at any point in time, your license can be revoked for too many speeding tickets, too many DWIs, or whatever else. So phone use in this house is not your right. I don't care if all your friends have the phones, they do, but it is a privilege. Here's the operating system that we're going to use and the boundaries that we create. So you get an hour of these apps per day, right? Bark, my kids know full well that Bark gets put on their phone. Like it's on your phone. And, for the most part, what I can tell you, we've been a Bark user for 2 years. And most of the time, I would see the alerts because Bark is a very sensitive app and it detects everything. And most of the time, nothing that I see is, 95% of what I see isn't even worth a conversation. It just isn't. It's also a great bird's eye view, though, of how their friends are interacting with them. And you get a really good gauge of the kids' friends. Like, you're like, oh, it's so-and-so. He's so nice to us. He's just such a good boy. And then you see how he's operating on text messages or things that he's saying or things that he's doing or thinking about doing. You're like, huh, so-and-so is not who I thought he was. So it's a great bird's eye view of their friends. And the rule too is I agree, no electronics like your phones in your rooms past 10 p.m. My kids, one of the rules is, and they don't like it. They have to hand over their phone at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
And that's it. And they're like, well, why? My friends are still up and they want to talk. I'm like, well, that's the deal. If again, your phone is a privilege. It's not a right. So that's the rules in this house.
You're absolutely right. It is a privilege. With that privilege comes responsibilities.
Yes.
And also the fact that because it is a privilege, if you violate the rules, if you violate that privilege, what happens? You lose the right to have it for a certain period of time, depending on how much you violated it. But that's the way life is. Sorry, but we have responsibilities throughout life. They're going to have responsibilities as an adult. And this is no different. This is a responsibility. This is a privilege. And with the privilege comes certain standards and certain requirements that if you violate, you lose the privilege.
Agreed.
Now they're going to get mad. They're going to get ticked off. But, that's probably not going to be the first time you've seen your child get ticked off or get angry or tell you no. As a parent, you get used to it and you almost expect it, and then you deal with it.
I also think if your kid is just constantly just pleased and comfortable with everything that's going on in their life, you probably aren't creating enough boundaries and parameters. So you might want to go check that one every now and again. It's okay to rattle the cage of your kid. It's got to be done. Being a parent, we're parents first. We're not friends. I'm your dad, not your friend. At times we can talk as friends and hang out as friends, but at the end of the day, like, the foundational guide and the person that I am is your father, right? It's not, you can have all the friends you want, but I'm your dad.
Yeah. And my responsibility as a parent, my highest responsibility as a parent is to keep you safe.
Yep.
In spite of your own behaviors. Right. My job is to keep you safe.
What about appropriate ages? So this one's all over the board. Even if you look at social media, it's like, okay, so I have one kid who's starting kindergarten this year, and I'm sorry, first grade, and another one who's starting third grade. And when my third grader was in the second grade, he was like, Dad, when can I have a phone? I was like, it's gonna be a while, man. 13 is our rule. He's like, but Dad, almost every kid in my class has a phone. And I'm like, and I thought he was BSing me. I was like, no, they don't. They're second graders. He's like, no, Dad, I'm serious. They really do. Like, most of my friends, most of the kids in my class have phones. I was like, there's no way. And my wife chimes in and she's like, no, he's absolutely right. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. She's like, nope. She's like, I've been in that. I've seen it. Like, yeah, a lot of them do. I was like, I just can't believe it. So if you ask 10 different parents, I think you might get 10 different answers on what the appropriate age is. But what I'd really love to know is, what is the appropriate age? And do we have any data or anything to support that this is a good age?
Well, I mean, the recommendations are all over the place, but the consensus seems to be among cyber experts that the minimum age for most of these applications is age 13. In other words, you shouldn't be below age 13. The one exception seems to be Snapchat, which is age 16. But what I would say is every child's different. You know your child better than anyone. So as a parent, you have to make a call as to that child's maturity, that child's level of responsibility, that child's ability to maintain guidelines and rules and regulations. And that should be the standard that you follow. For some teenagers, age 13, 14 might be very appropriate. For some, it might not be appropriate at 14 or 15 because of their behavior. So as a parent, you know your child best. You need to make the judgment call as to whether or not you think your child is mature enough, responsible enough, and has a history of following the rules that you set down. And that's going to guide you in terms of what age you feel is appropriate. The phone in school issue, unfortunately, sadly, I think in some cases is prompted by all these school shootings that we're seeing. Parents want their kids to be able to have access to a phone while they're in school, so that if, God forbid, something terrible were to be able to happen, they can get in touch with their kid and their kid can get in touch with them. It's a sad commentary on our society, but unfortunately, I can understand how some parents would just feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that their child has a phone at school, even if they're like in first, second, or third grade.
I could see that. I could definitely see that for an emergency use only. Do they still make the phones that I mean, in our house, we call them a dumb phone. Do they still make the phones that basically all the kid can do is call 5 numbers and that's it? They can't text, they can't do apps, and they can't do that. Or do we even, I don't even know anymore. I haven't been in a phone store for
I don't know if they have phones like that anymore. They may. And if they do, I think that's great. You know, you can send that off to school with your child. You put your phone number in it, and that's it. But quite honestly, I haven't seen a phone like that in a long, long time. I'm not saying they don't make them, and I'm not saying a parent shouldn't inquire to see if they can get one. It's a great it's a great option if they can, and certainly worth the investment. But you know, I haven't seen one of those phones in a long time.
Do you remember the bag phones?
The bag phones.
Yeah. No, it's like, I mean, we're talking like late 90s. Like this is where people had, like, if somebody actually had like a car phone, like something mounted like in their car, like a phone, like you knew that they were like a gazillionaire. Like that's what you always thought. Yeah. But then after, you know, those came out, it was the bag phone. It was like, it was like this, it was monstrous, right? It had a big antenna and all that, but you carry it in this black, like purse looking thing. And that was like your bag phone. And then it was like a few years later, that's when they started coming out with like the Nokias and the flip phones and all that good stuff. But
yeah, those phones at the beginning were huge.
Oh, dude. Yeah. Even if you had, I remember being in the late 90s in college and when phones came out and I remember like, oh man, if you had a phone, like I remember dating this one girl. I was like, your family must be rich.
Yeah. Well, and initially they were expensive.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the new technology was expensive, and then all of a sudden it explodes.
Yep, exactly. Well, this has been really, really helpful. You've given us a lot of great data points. You know, you've given us some information on apps and what they're using them for, who's using them, the age groups, and all that. We talked about the Facebook study and the psychological impact of what's happening on our kids, as well as the Mayo Clinic research and recommendations. What is there anything we haven't tackled that you think would be really meaningful for the audience?
No, I think we've covered the basics. I would just encourage parents that you know, when you say it's appropriate for your child to have these apps, download them on your phone, pay attention to them, get into them, become knowledgeable about them, and you know, check in with your child from time to time to see how things are going on these social apps. Have a conversation, sit down and ask them to share with you how things are going. Now, they may or they may not do that, but I think you want to leave that option open for your child to be able to share with you some of the things that they're seeing. But you're going to have to take the initiative to develop that communication.
Awesome. All righty. Well, gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Obviously, much needed. Now you understand why I had to have Richard back to talk about this topic, because it is front of mind and it is an absolute battle that we face as parents every single day. If you guys want to connect with Richard, and he's going to mention the best ways to do that, head on over to the dadedge.com/Friday71 for this show. But Richard, what is the best way for men to connect with you?
Go to my book's website, which is www.helptheaddictedchild.com, helptheaddictedchild.com. If you have a chance, listen to our previous discussion on teenage substance use. We had a really good conversation about that topic. There's a book available, only around 100 pages, that will help parents become more knowledgeable about substance abuse. All of that's available on the book's website. And then there's a link that will take you directly to where you can send me a message or a comment or ask a question, and it will come to me.
Outstanding. Well, gentlemen, we're going to have all those links in the show notes, not to worry. Again, the dadedge.com/Friday71 for this show. Gentlemen, go out, live legendary. Take care.